Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. Want to thank you for tuning us in at this time, the 19th of August, and hope you'll stay with us for the next hour. Also at 92.1 WFOV, and want to thank again Mr. Paul Herring and welcome them aboard as well. We air on that program and that station on Fridays and Saturday. And so we're very glad to have them as part of our team. I'm going to be doing something very different for the next 4 weeks. I'm going to be doing 4 different programs, and each one will be on a different topic. Today I'm going to be talking about the, well, let me say that one. I'll talk about the others first, and I'll tell you what we're going to talk about today. The next week we're going to talk about the usurpation of Barack Obama. And I want to put his presidency into a perspective that no one else has talked about. And I want to talk about the real usurpation of this president and not the one that some of his critics have made up. There was a usurpation, but it was not the birthright of Obama. Obama was born in the United States. And I'm going to clean up why there's this confusion about his birthplace, confusion that Barack Obama actually caused, by the way, because of the fact he talked out of both sides of his mouth about his birthright for political advantages at different times during his career. And I'll make sure we understand that in next week's program. The week after that, which will be the 2nd of September, there'll be a program that I'm going to be doing called The Duping of the NAACP, the Brown versus Board of Education ruling by the Supreme Court in 1954. And I want to go into this case and point some things out that nobody else has pointed out because we don't get it. And I want to show how what we think we know may not be so. Somebody, I think was it Mark Twain that said that it's not the things that we know that is a problem, it's the things that we know that are not so that are a problem. And one of those is the duping of the NAACP, the Brown versus Board of Education ruling that occurred in 1954. And I'm going to try to put that in perspective on September the 2nd in the 3rd of our series. In the 4th series, I want to go into an area that we don't talk about because we don't see a need to talk about it. We just assumed it to be true. And that is the topic would be the mythology of black leadership. And I will be talking about these so-called black leaders we have in this country, so we can hopefully understand a lot better, at least on our networks, that this whole claim of black leadership is bogus. And so those 3 topics starting next week. Today, this topic I want to cover is one that's born out of what I've been covering for the last so many weeks. We've been talking about impeachment. And what we really are talking about, quite frankly, underneath that is the attempt to overthrow a duly held election in this country. And therefore, I want to interface with that in our program today, and a topic that I think ties into with this, and if we are honest, they were tied into this as well, and that is the Kennedy assassination. You see, one thing that I noticed nobody is making a connection to. Nobody's making a connection with the intelligence community coming out and trying to undo a duly held election in this country. But why aren't we connecting it then and raising a question about what have they done in this regard in the past? And that's why I want to tie in what we're looking at right now in terms of what they're trying to do to overturn a duly held election in this country, with the intelligence community involved in it up to their eye teeth. What have they done in the past to try to undo an election, and what have they done to undo elections in this country? And one of the things they did to undo elections in this country was what we saw in Dealey Plaza. And that's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to be reading a lot of the first chapter of the book put out by this marvelous investigator named Craig Roberts. And Craig Roberts' book, I'm going to hold it up to the camera, is called The Kill Zone. The Kill Zone. Now, people do not know see, I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to even think about whether it's a conspiracy, because I know it's a conspiracy. Because people don't know that motorcade route was changed. That right there shows conspiracy, because it wasn't until the 11th hour that the route that was changed to was publicized. That means then, with those shooters in place, those shooters that were in place in Dealey Plaza, had to have had foreknowledge that route was going to be changed. And that's what Craig Roberts is writing about in his book called The Kill Zone. Because by that route being changed, that motorcade went into the kill zone. That motorcade was supposed to go down Main Street. And whenever you see any city which has Main Street, that means that's a main street of that city. You wouldn't call it Main Street if it was not a main street. And the reason why you call it Main Street is because that's where all the activity is. That's the Main Street because that's where you have all the businesses, all the a lot of the folks going up and down the street. It's a lot of activity. You want the president to go down Main Street. You don't want him turning off Main Street. And they had the president turning off Main Street, turning on to Houston, and then on to Elm Street. And when that motorcade turned on Elm Street, making a 120-degree turn. So that right there shows me conspiracy, because one of the things you don't do in a motorcade where the president is, you can read that. You can read the journal. You can read their books about protecting the president. You don't want the president making a turn because then the motorcade has to slow down to make a turn, exposing him to anyone that may be in a sniper's nest. And that's what the president has to do. Coming off of Houston, first of all, Maine, then Houston, and then coming around onto Elm Street. And here's the other part of it. And coming onto Elm Street, Oswald is supposed to be perched in the school depository, and that car, the president's car, that motorcade, is coming directly in the line of fire for 1 block. And if Oswald is perched on the 6th floor, and this is what he's going to be raising in what I'll be reading, and holds his fire when the president coming toward the school depository, because Houston runs north and south, and Elm Street runs east and west, and therefore when that car is coming down Houston to turn on Elm Street, that car is perpendicular to that window where Oswald is supposed to be perched. And no shot is fired at that time. He's going to raise the question about why did nobody shoots why Oswald does not shoot at that point in time. And I'll read when I get to the part there. I will point out why that shot is not taken at that point. There's a reason why why there's no shooting at that time. And he's going to make that very clear in what I'll be reading. But I want you to understand something. This that you're looking at right now is not a one-time deal, nor is it the first time the intelligence community has overturned elections in this country. This is a repetition of it. But now that they come out more so out into the open as they had to come out with Donald Trump, because they didn't intend to have Donald Trump win. They didn't think he had a shot at it. They believed their own press. And they were talking out in the open to each other. James Comey, the FBI director, and his communication side of that network with people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And then you had Clapper over there with Clapper was over with the intelligence network, and then you had Brennan, the director of the CIA, and all of them were Comey, the FBI, Clapper, and Brennan, all of them involved in the intelligence network. They were talking out in the open about what they were going to do to shortchange this election. They thought Donald Trump was going to be stopped. But if he was not stopped, they had a backup plan. The backup plan was what you saw last week. We now know from what we saw last week that Mueller didn't write the report. Isn't that interesting? Mueller couldn't even tell last week in front of Nadler's committee. He couldn't even ask a question about the report because Mueller didn't write the report and was not familiar with the report. And when Ted Lieu asked him the question about try to lead Mueller, because Mueller is not all there, you saw it for yourself last week, asked Mueller if it had not been for the AOL, meaning the law that says you cannot indict a sitting president, if it had not been for that, would you have recommended the president be indicted? And Mueller answered yes. But go look at what he said in the afternoon session. In front of the Nadler committee, he said that he would have brought about charging the president if it had not been for the fact you can't indict a sitting president. Well, you're not indicting the sitting president anyway. What you're doing is saying that the president should be charged. You're not going to do the indictment. You're saying the president was guilty of the crime, but he could not charge him with the crime. You can't charge him with the crime. You just can't indict him. But you didn't charge him with the crime. You said there was not enough evidence. So Mueller, knowing that he had contradicted his own report, in the afternoon session, I hope you saw this, he said, now before the Adam Schiff committee, the House Intelligence Committee, of which Adam Schiff chairs, he said, before I open it up to questions, I want to make a statement here. And that was because obviously during the lunch break, Mueller talked over with his legal team, and they said, look, you got a contradiction here. You're saying that you would have charged the president at the same time your report says you didn't have enough evidence to charge the president. So he made a statement at the beginning of the hearing headed by the committee that was in fact chaired by Adam Schiff. And he said that he misspoke, and he corrected himself. Now, because he said something different in front of Nadler's committee, Nadler's going to act like he didn't know that in the afternoon session that this man, Mueller, had in fact corrected himself and said that was not the case. That he did not find the evidence. In other words, there was no finding of any evidence of obstruction. They've left collusion. That's been, thrown off they're not talking about that anymore. They now want to get obstruction of justice as the basis of the bringing the president to heel through impeachment, which I will make this prediction and right now, they are going to impeach this president. That does not mean they're going to get away with it. The only reason they're stalling and not bringing the impeachment right now is because they think they can continue to dirty up the atmosphere so as to pull some Republicans away from the president, so that when it goes into the Senate, where the trial is held, they'll have some people in the Senate that cannot back the president during an election year, which is 2020, because it's too hot to handle, as they did for Richard Nixon. And that's how they drove Nixon out, as they toppled his administration. And Russ Baker has shown that Richard Nixon was toppled by the CIA. You can go read the 2 chapters on Nixon in that book. One chapter called Set Up, and the following chapter called Out. Richard Nixon was overthrown by the CIA. I knew it before I read Russ Baker's book. But I didn't have all of the ducks lined up to make a case publicly. That's why I kept my mouth closed. But I was aware of it. And all Russ Baker did for me was put some pieces of the puzzle together, which made what my own research has shown more complete. And so the toppling of the Richard Milhouse Nixon administration got him on obstruction and made him resign because the Republican Party could not back him up. Because if they had done that, given how bad he was looking in public, they would have risked their being returned to office, their re-election, and they were not going to do that. You can't ask a politician to commit political suicide by going out on a limb, because that's not what they're going to do. Politicians are not going to go out there on a limb, because you can't put the word politician and courage in the same sentence. There's no courage among these people. Want to stay under the radar, and what the establishment did was dirty up Nixon's name enough so that he could not get support of the Republican Party in the Senate. And when Nixon found out he did not have that support, then that's why he stepped down from the office. And on 2 different impeachments, by the way, Adam Schiff was part of the management group. So what Adam Schiff is doing right now, not new. I researched the 19 times. We've had 19 different impeachments. 19 impeachments in this country. Who do you think has been? What group of people do you think has been most impeached in this country? 19, right? How many of you think were presidents? 2. Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998. That was tried between February and May of 1998. Those 2 presidents. One was Blunt, a senator, that should never have been impeached, because you cannot impeach senators and members of the House because they're not federal office holders. And he resigned before he went to trial, so he was never convicted. He stepped down from his post. but he was impeached in the House because they didn't understand the Constitution at that time, and they don't understand it even now. Because you cannot impeach a senator and you cannot impeach a member of the House. And the reason for that, in case you didn't know, you scholars, is because Article 2, Section 4 calls for the impeachment and removal from office for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors of civil office holders of the United States, not civil office holders of the states from which they are elected. And senators and members of the House, and I think I'm the only one that is saying this in the country, but if I'm the only one saying it, it's because I'm the only one that's right. I guess I'm one of the few persons that can read the Constitution, because I am claiming here, based upon having listened to all the scholars about this process, I am convinced that these people are illiterate. I don't mean the same way they're illiterate on the street. They have a higher level of literacy, but they cannot read with interpreting what it is that they're reading. That's illiteracy also, but on a higher level. They can't read. You cannot say the things that these people are saying and be literate. And I'm saying that the senators, Blunt was impeached by the House of Representatives in 1797 is because the members of the House could not read. There are people still alive at this point that had been involved in that room. They didn't even know what they had created in that room. Why would that be the case? Because not all of them are working on all parts of the Constitution. And the impeachment part, some of them didn't work on. And they're in the House right now. They didn't know what that language was. And they thought they could impeach a member of the Senate. And that's why they impeached Blunt, William Blunt, in 1797. Fortunately, or unfortunately, because I wish it had played out so we could get an answer to what they did here and get it played out so that we could have had an answer before they tried to remove Andrew Johnson. But be that as it may, you cannot impeach a member of the House and Senate because they're not federal officers of the United States. They are removed by what's found in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. And that is that the House of Representatives and the Senate shall set the rules up for their own members, and they, by a concurrence of 2/3 of the members in those bodies, can vote by a concurrence of 2/3 vote to remove a member of the House or a member of the Senate. That is to say, the Senate can censor and remove its members by 2/3 vote, and the House can censor and remove from office members of its body by 2/3 vote. But it does not go to the impeachment process, and it recognizes by that language in Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, it recognizes in that language that the impeachment process is not open to members of the Senate and members of the House. And that was in the Constitution when they impeached Blunt, and they could not read it because they didn't know at that time what they had created. And they don't understand it even now. You cannot impeach a member of the House and a member of the Senate. They're not federal office holders of the United States. And if any scholar out there says otherwise, come see me. Because you're not as literate as I am. And when I say it's this way in the Constitution, it is that way. And if you say otherwise, Houston, you got a problem. And that problem is George W. Moss. So we have people that are misappropriating information about how this process works. And we've had presidents toppled in this country. I'm talking about conspiracy to topple presidents, going back to Abraham Lincoln, that was toppled by a conspiracy. The first president that was shot out of power in this country was Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated April the 14th, 1865, 1 month after his second inauguration. Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated March the 4th, 1865. This was his second inauguration, and 10 days later, 10 days into the month of April, the next month, I should say 14 days into the next month, after the inauguration taking place March 4th, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy. And I think, I better not say this part about it, but it's very suspicious that Ulysses S. Grant, that should have been in that booth with Abraham Lincoln, that did not show up, who would become the next elected president in this country, the 18th president that was elected in 1868. It's interesting to me that Grant did not show up as he had pledged to be, was not there. Has anybody investigated that? And you probably are aware that 8 people were hanged because of the murder of the president, Abraham Lincoln. There was conspiracy in that case. And all these other cases that followed thereafter, supposedly no conspiracy, single lone nut that killed the President of the United States. You cannot even get to a President of the United States. It's impossible unless the President's security breaks down. I have gone to certain places where the President's been speaking. And since I can never get in, I'm outside and I see what they do in order to secure the place, the motorcade, and all of that when the president comes into that particular area. You probably are aware of the fact that anything that flies overhead of the president motorcade, if they get within a mile of the president, that the protocol is that plane is shot down. You can't even fly over the airplane. Cannot fly over the motorcade where the president is. That plane will be shot down if it's within a mile radius of the motorcade. And what I noticed when I go to those rallies, and I'll tell you this, I go to all of Donald Trump's rallies that are within the vicinity of Michigan. He comes to Ohio, I'm there. He goes to Indiana, I'm there. But I'm outside watching how the security is. Because, for a lot of reasons, I'm going to watch the security. I want to study that. Because I don't trust the intelligence community. Because I know the role they played in this country, in this politics in this country. I know who they are. I know what they try to do in this case here and still trying to do. I understand they operate behind the scenes. And I understand what you're doing with what you did with Mueller. Mueller's senile. But he has a reputation of having done some great things in terms of his quote unquote service to this country. So they put him up there as a figurehead, and then behind the scenes they are the ones operating in the background. Mueller didn't write that report. I'll tell you who wrote that report. The one that Sidney Powell, who wrote the book called License to Lie. Brilliant woman, who is now, by the way, representing Flynn. General Flynn is being represented by Sidney Powell, who wants him to rescind his guilty verdict. The only reason he pleaded guilty was because they were bleeding him dry. That's what Mueller was doing. That's what the Mueller committee was doing. Bringing them up there repeatedly, having them get a lawyer. They had to pay the legal fees, drive their fees up, and they have to at some point throw their hands up in the air and surrender. Otherwise, you're bankrupting their family. That's why Flynn pleaded guilty, because what Mueller was doing. Want to welcome back WFOV, and we're not very far away, and I haven't even gotten into what I'm supposed to read yet. But I'm trying to lay a foundation of what I am going to read, because this is just a continuation of business as usual by the intelligence community in this country. They don't want us to be in charge of the elections in the United States. And they're doing here the same thing they're doing around all over the world. And they act like they're so hurt that people will interfere with the elections of the United States. You cannot overturn the election of the United States from Russia. That can't happen in this country. And it didn't happen in 2016. This intelligence community is in the background operating. And Craig Roberts in his Kill Zone is talking about what happened in Dealey Plaza in 1963. Let me read a large part of the first chapter of that book, because this is it. I mean, there's a lot of books out there. I read most of them, but this right here puts it into another dimension about what occurred in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963. He starts out by saying, in 1963, the 6th floor was an open warehouse-type storage room, stacked with rows of brown cardboard boxes filled with books. He says now, he's talking about 1986 when he visited there. Now, in 1986, it was a large, fairly open room interspersed with various displays, diagrams, and enlarged photographs that focus on the tragic event that had occurred so many years before. He says, I studied the diagrams and photos and read the descriptions with mild interest. I already knew the story. Lee Harvey Oswald, a known communist with mental problems, had shot President John F. Kennedy. He was later apprehended by the Dallas police, but before he could get to trial, he was shot by Jack Ruby. Every American school kid knew this version of the events of that day. We have been taught it is part of our history classes, and even the encyclopedia recorded the Oswald Gunman scenario as gospel truth. Still reading from the book, as I wandered around the exhibits, it's on the 6th floor of the school depository, I thought back to the day that altered history. It was the 22nd of November, 1963. I was a senior in high school, sitting in drafting class, waiting for the teacher to call roll after returning from lunch. All of a sudden, the PA system cracked with an announcement. President Kennedy had been shot in Dallas, and he has just been rushed to a hospital. We, meaning the students in the classroom, looked at each other, wondering who had sneaked into the school office during lunch and gained access to the public address system. Surely it was some type of practical joke. But then the announcement was followed by radio news reporters describing the events that were unfolding in Dallas. In excited voices, it was no joke. I leaned over to my best friend and whispered, quote, well, they finally got him. His friend answered, yeah, too bad it wasn't before the invasion, meaning the invasion of Cuba. Because many people blame the president for not giving cover for that invasion of the Cuban exiles that were going to go back into Cuba and try to topple the Castro administration. So all this noise we're hearing now about how the country was broken up, about the killing of Kennedy, not everybody. And that's what Craig Roberts is getting to, of the other reaction to the president being assassinated. Those were common sentiments throughout the South and Midwest. Talking about the comment about, yeah, too bad it wasn't before the invasion. Many people were mad at John F. Kennedy. These were common sentiments throughout the South and Midwest. Neither my friend or I had any love for JFK. He was a guy who would call off the air support for the Bay of Pigs invasion, dooming it to failure, then almost plunged us into nuclear war with Russia over the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now he was actively talking about getting us out of Vietnam, which meant that another of Eisenhower's dominoes would fall to communism. And the dominoes they're talking about is that once one nation falls to communism, it's like a domino effect. This domino pushing the other dominoes over. This man, our president, reading from Craig Roberts' book, this man, our president, was gutless. And for a conservative generation that had been born at the end of World War II, to parents who had fought valiantly in that war and who had grown up on a steady diet of patriotic movies and documentaries, we could not imagine an America that would bow down to anyone, especially those evil reds that we had learned about every year in social studies. Because of our apprehension of having an East Coast liberal in the White House, East Coast liberal, yes, Massachusetts. He's talking about John F. Kennedy. Many of us had actively campaigned for Nixon and were shocked when Kennedy and Johnson, quote, won, that's in quotation marks, won the election by a mere 100,000 votes. The word won is in quotation marks because he's calling attention to the fact that election there was stolen from Nixon. Even though Lyndon Baines Johnson sent me to Vietnam, this is, again, the book, I'm quoting from Craig's book. Even though LBJ sent me to Vietnam 18 months later as part of the 1st Marine Battalion landing team to see combat in that Asian country, meaning Vietnam, I felt that fate had dictated a favorable turn of events for American international policy when Oswald shot Kennedy. Listen to that now. Unlike the media portrayal of national shock and grief over Kennedy's death, many people actually felt relieved. But this hot day in Dallas, November the 22nd, 1963, would alter that for me. Not because of any change in personal politics or loyalties, but of another entirely different factor, a gut-wrenching, instantaneous realization that I, along with every other patriotic American, had been duped. I immediately felt like I had been hit with a sledgehammer. The word that came to mind at what I saw as I looked down through the window at Elm Street and the kill zone was, the word that came to his mind was, as he looked over the site of where the assassination had taken place, and don't forget this man has a sniper background, that's why he calls his book Kill Zone. A sniper looks at Dealey Plaza. This is a sniper that's writing this book. When he looked over the site where they said that Oswald was a single shooter in the Dealey Plaza that day, he said one word that came to mind as he looked over the site where this assassination was supposed to have been taking place by one person, and that word that came to mind was impossible. I knew instantly that Oswald could not have done it, at least not alone. Oswald could not have possibly fired 3 shots in rapid succession, 5.6 seconds according to the museum displays. With a worn-out military surplus Mannlicher Carcano mounted with a cheap telescopic sight from that particular location to the kill zone. I now established in more detail on the street below. The reason I knew that Oswald could not have done it was because I could not have done it. Unlike Oswald, who failed to qualify on the rifle range in boot camp and who barely qualified as a marksman, the lowest of 3 grades on a later try. He said, unlike Oswald, who barely qualified as a marksman on the 3rd try, he says, that means this sniper expert, I was trained and combat experienced Marine sniper. I had spent a year in Vietnam, during which time I had numerous occasions to line up living, breathing human beings in the crosshairs of my precision scope and squeeze the trigger of my bolt action model 70 Winchester and send a 30 caliber match grade round zipping down range. He's saying if he could not do what they said Oswald did, and he was a 3rd grade marksman, here's a sniper that was an expert. He said if he could not do what they said Oswald did, then Oswald, who's a 3rd grade marksman, could not have done it.
Besides, I mean, I shoot quite a bit. I have a Mannlicher Carcano rifle.
Okay.
And I've tried to just dry fire, which means have no rounds in it. Just pull the bolt back, push it back forward, slam it down home, and pull the trigger. I couldn't get off shots just dry firing it randomly in that same time frame.
That's right.
So much less placing the shots. And another thing is too, when you get a weapon, when you get something like that, you train continuously with it. I know a lot about firearms.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around since I was 9 years old. I've been shooting since I was like 12. Okay. And I just don't see the Mannlicher's been said it wasn't a very dependable rifle. A lot of people said it's not a bad rifle. But regardless of that, the thing is, I just couldn't dry fire a rifle that, I mean, just bang, bang.
Yeah, because it's a bolt action.
Yeah, but there's no ammo in it, but to much less patient to place in a shot. And you have to, those guys, when they're sniping, they put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds down range before they're satisfied. And they're always checking their weapons. They're always sighting it in. They're always going through, checks on that. I just don't see him being able to do that.
John, do you find that weapon to be accurate?
Well, see, I never I was just saying that's the reason why. Another thing is
a dry run.
Yeah, just a dry run. Another thing is too, the Carcano. You have to go. It's not one of the more readily available rounds.
Right.
You have to go actually pick them up somewhere, and they're quite pricey. Actually, I think they're about $30 for 25 rounds.
Yeah. The reason why I asked you if you ever fired and found it to be accurate is that the Italians say, it's a 6.5 Italian Carcano.
Right.
The Italians say that's why they lost World War II.
Yeah, that's what they said. I mean, some people say they know how to work them, or they could, there's critics and there's also defenders on them. But personally, I've read several people saying that was the worst shoulder-held weapon, personal small firearm they've ever shot.
Right.
So I mean, on several experts, forums. So.
And there's some things that Oswald could not have known about how to fire on a downward slope, because you have to. Unlike when you're shooting directly at a target, like there's a target and you're shooting directly at it from ground level, when you're shooting down, you got to compensate by the fact that the gravity is different. And so you shoot low because you're standing, you're perched high. So you shoot low in order to hit the target. Oswald wasn't privy to that information.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless he was a trained sniper, see, if you shoot...
You wouldn't know that.
Yeah, you shoot a gun straight on, like you're sitting in a rifle range, you have it set up, you're straight, your gun's going to go, actually, when it comes out of the muzzle, it goes up a little bit, then drops, and then it, slightly, the trajectory goes straight, and then basically it runs out of energy, and it drops, the trajectory, it drops considerably, especially if you have it further away from a target. So basically... I just don't see how he did it. I can't put my mind around
Oswald did not do it, and that's why and that's why, given what they're doing right now, you see, if they were honest, folks, if they were honest, and they see the intelligence community trying to overthrow a duly elected government in this country, if they were honest, they would see the parallel in terms of what has occurred in the past. They don't even answer the question, as if this is a first-time event. But if they were honest, they would begin to say that we need to go back and open up the Kennedy assassination, because now we see the intelligence community out of control. In this election we just held in 2016, So then what was happening in Dealey Plaza? When there was another attempt, and a successful attempt, at a coup d'etat. They didn't succeed in this case right here, and they're not going to succeed. But the attempt was made. But you think they're going to make a connection to the Kennedy assassination? Not going to do it. Because, and until we get, they're not going to do it because they're corrupt. Until we get the answer to what happened in Dealey Plaza, although we pretty much know, we know the names of the conspirators. Until they announce that publicly and they reveal what's in those files, we can't be a whole country. Let me continue to read what this writer says, Craig Roberts. Here I was, a professional police officer and writer, looking down at the most famous ambush site in history through the eyes of a sniper. A strange feeling came over me, a feeling of calm, dampening my anger. The trained investigator inside of me surfaced and took over my emotions. I began to scrutinize what my senses were absorbing. First, I analyzed the scene as a sniper. In the time allotted and in the distance along the street in which the rounds had impacted the target from first report to final shot, it would take a minimum of 2 people shooting. There was little hope that I alone, even if armed with the precision equipment I had used in Vietnam, would be able to duplicate the feat described by the Warren Commission. So if I couldn't, I reasoned Oswald couldn't, unless he had help. I looked at the engagement angle. It was entirely wrong. The wall of the building in which the window overlooked Dealey Plaza ran east and west. By looking directly down at the best engagement angle, which is straight out the window facing south, in other words, the target is coming toward, you see, Elm Street runs east and west. The motorcade is coming. The street, Houston Street, because they turned off Main to Houston Street is running north and south. That target, therefore, where, if you look at the photos, you'll see that the book depository is right there in the corner of Elm and Houston. That car is coming right down that street toward that sniper's nest. And the shot is not fired as he's coming toward. That's the best shot, but it's not taken. And he's going to tell you about why it wasn't taken. Just wait a minute. Let me read what this is uncovered. This is uncovering here, because there's conspiracy to kill this president. Of that, there is zero possibility of it being an error. This was a death of a president in this country by a deep state conspiracy. He says, so if I couldn't do it, I reason Oswald couldn't, unless he had help. I looked at the engagement angle. It was entirely wrong. The wall of the building in which the windows overlooking Dealey Plaza ran east and west. By looking directly down at the best engagement angle, which was straight out the window facing south, I could see Houston Street. Houston was perpendicular to the wall and ran directly toward the window. This is the street on which the motorcade had approached and would have been my second choice as a zone of engagement. My first choice was directly below the window, at a drastic bend in the street that had to be negotiated by Kennedy's limousine. It would have to slow appreciably almost to a stop. And when it did, the target would be presented moving at its slowest pace. That would be his first choice. His second choice would be that car coming down Houston Street toward Elm Street, where it's going to turn. He's coming right into the kill zone, right there on the corner of Houston and Elm Street. And that shot is not taken. The president's coming directly in the line of fire, the second best angle, because the car is coming toward the shooter. The best angle is when the car is turning because it slows down. The shot is not taken at either one of those sites. Let me read why. My first choice was directly below the window at a drastic bend in the street that had to be negotiated by Kennedy's limousine. It would have to slow appreciably, almost to a stop. And when it did, the target would be presented moving at its slowest pace. The last zone of engagement I would pick would be as the limo drove away toward the west and the grassy knoll. This is a sniper surveying the kill zone. Here, from what I could see, 3 problems arose that would influence my shot. First, the target was moving away at a drastic angle to the right from the window, meaning that I would have to position my body to compete with the wall and a set of vertical water pipes on the left frame of the window to get a shot. This would be extremely difficult for a right-handed shooter. You know what I want to ask right now, and I don't think anybody has investigated this? What side of Malcolm Wallace's body was he left-handed? I'd like to have an answer to that question. Because Malcolm Wallace was Johnson hitman. If he's left-handed, then he's in that sniper's nest. It would not have been a difficult shot for a left-handed person.
My friend Mike brings that point up all the time. Where did the assassination happen at? Texas. Who was from Texas? Kennedy's, vice president.
I'm glad you said that, John.
And he said, if you look at any other crime, you look at what motive.
Who benefited?
Yeah, who would benefit? And they tell me Johnson was delighted in becoming in that role.
We were stereo-eyed at that time. Otherwise, we'd have made that connection. We were stereo-eyed. I know I was. I was in college at that time. They lured the president to Texas with the intent that he would never leave Texas. This would be extremely difficult for a right-handed shooter. Second, I would have to be ready to fire exactly when the target emerged past some tree branches that obscured the kill zone. Finally, I would have to deal with 2 factors at the same time: the curve of the street and the high to low angle formula, a law of physics, Oswald would not have known. Even if I waited for the target to pass the primary and secondary engagement zones. The primary being coming down Houston toward Elm Street, perpendicular to Elm Street, coming right down into the kill zone and a shot not fired. Even if I waited for the target to pass the primary target and the secondary engagement zones where the car is now turning, and for some reason decided to engage instead in the worst possible area, I still had to consider the fact that Oswald made his farthest and most difficult shot last. The shot that killed the president, the headshot, the kill shot, was the last shot fired, when it was most difficult to fire that shot. I estimated the range for this shot at between 80 and 90 yards. It was his final shot that, according to the Warren Commission, struck Kennedy's head. As an experienced sniper, something else bothered me. Any sniper knows that the 2 most important things to be considered in selecting a position are the fields of fire and a route to escape. You have to have both. It is of little value to take a shot, then not be able to successfully get away to fight another day. Even if the window was a spot that I was selected for to hide, I had doubts about my ability to escape afterwards. According to what little I had read, the elevator was stuck on the floor below at the time in question, and only the stairway could have been used as a means of withdrawal. And there were dozens of people, potential witnesses below, who would be able to identify anyone rushing away from the scene. Not good. But Oswald was not a trained, experienced military sniper. He was supposed to be little more than some oddball with a grudge, and for whatever reason had decided to buy a rifle and shoot the President of the United States. Also, the Warren Commission would have us believe. It is important at this point to demonstrate exactly what would have had to happen that warm November day in 1963 on this very floor. To do this, the reader must become Lee Harvey Oswald. He's now asking the reader to put themselves in Oswald's place. For the sake of argument, let us assume that the Warren Commission was correct in their findings. Oswald, the lone nut, was the only shooter to fire at the president. He managed to smuggle his rifle up to the 6th floor, realizing well in advance that the motorcade would pass through the Dealey Plaza below on his lunch hour, which is the only open kill zone on the route, and was well prepared to take as many shots as he could at the open convertible, which he didn't even know would be uncovered that day. Nor did anyone know that the motorcade would detour to aim for a turn back to the west by the book depository unless they caught a late issue of the newspaper. We're getting ready to close out for this segment, and we'll continue it next week. To see what would have had to transpire on the 22nd of November, 1963, to accomplish what the Warren Commission said Oswald did, we must return to the scene of the crime and recreate the events. We must look at Dealey Plaza through a sniper's eyes. It was only this way, with the information presented here, that one can begin to comprehend how false the Warren Commission's verdict was. The toppling of another administration in this country and the attempted coup d'etat on this president by the same intelligence networks. And we got to return to Dealey Plaza to understand what's happening right now in the so-called impeachment process of this president, because the toppling of this administration is by the same agencies that toppled Richard Nixon and actually took John F. Kennedy out. We'll continue this next week, and we'll get to our other subjects next week as well, as far as the next topic, the usurpation of Barack Obama. We'll do all of that next week. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.